Spring has sprung for most of you, hopefully. I know my hometown just had a massive snowstorm, so that's you. I sincerely apologize. Hopefully these books will help to get you in a more spring mood. I have about 15 books to chat to you about, all different genres, so let's get into it. The first thing I want to recommend is this graphic novel series. The first one is The Tea Dragon Society, and this is such a lovely little graphic novel about these dragons that you make tea from. It really is like the perfect spring book. You're getting the greenery, the outside, the fun animal companion. The art style in here is full of fun, bright colors, but it's also tea, so it's still keeping a little bit warm while you're having those chilly nights. You're throwing a cardigan on after dinner. I absolutely adore these stories, and I have personally been saving the third one. It's already out, but I refuse to read it because I don't want it to be over. If that tells you anything about how much I love this. These books are super inclusive and super cozy, and I just have the loveliest time when I read them. Very much switching gears, the next book I have to recommend to you is horror, and it's called Monstrilio, and it is this beautiful literary horror. Often when I think of spring, I think of motherhood, I think of new beginnings, I think of things changing, and this is the story of a mother whose son has passed away, and she saves a piece of his lung to remember him by. She ends up feeding this lung and it turns into a monster, Monstrilio, and she starts to raise this monster and try to make it more and more like her son who she's grieving. We're getting different perspectives throughout this entire book, including Monstrilio's perspective, and it is a modern day Frankenstein. I love it so much. It's this really poignant story about grief. It's heartbreaking, it's scary at times, it is horror, but more of a literary horror. We're asking questions about what we do to cope with grief, about if the creator or the creation has a right to who that creation is and what it becomes. And we're also talking a lot about what it is to be known and unknown. It just feels like a very big brain spring book if you're going and sitting on a little picnic blanket, having a picnic with your friends. Because it's one of those books that really makes you want to talk to someone about it. So have your friends on standby when you read this. The next book I'm going to recommend is a weird one, and it's Several People Are Typing. This book is what I think of when I am sitting at my day job and going, I really wish we had a spring break. Because what's more spring than getting stuck in your company's Slack channel and then having your Slack bot impersonate you and reflecting on sunsets and love in a really strange and cozy way. I can't really explain why it feels like spring to me, but there's no other season that I would put this into. As Carmen Maria Machado says, it's an absurd, hilarious romp through the haunted house of late-stage capitalism. And because of the sunsets and the love and the silly absurdity of the being stuck in a Slack channel, it just feels spring. I also have a romance recommendation for you. If you've already read Half a Soul, I want you to know that there's an entire series. I've read the first two and they were both excellent, and hopefully this week, I'm gonna be reading the third one, which is Long Shadow. These are Regency fairy tale romances, and they're very romantic, slow burn. I think all they do in this is have a little smooch. It's very chaste and very cozy, but it's also fae. In Half a Soul, our main character has half of a soul because a fairy took half of it, and so she kind of doesn't understand a lot of social cues and is very neurodivergent coded. We get to kind of see how she navigates this world. She goes with her friend to her season out at court to find a husband, and our main character isn't expecting to find someone because she has half a soul and is kind of expecting to be a bit of a wallflower during this season. But she finds a little romance of her own, and I really liked how this was very fairy in the fae way, but still remained incredibly cozy. I feel like fairies can often get very dark because of the trickery and the rules and the feeling of unease, but I felt like this series does a really great job of retaining that coziness. And I think anytime we have a romance season, that feels very spring to me. The other thing that I think of when I think of a spring book is something that is transportative. Spring in my head is very much tied to spring break, spring vacation. I feel like I want to exit, I want to go somewhere, I want to learn new things. And this book I think hits all of my wants in a spring book. It has a little romance. It has this grand quest adventure. It is incredibly cozy. We're on a ship. We're also in a fantasy world. So we're learning things about this world. And I think Brandon Sanderson does world building like nobody else. It's just so integrative and not confusing and so lovely to just be along for the ride and finding out these intricate magic systems that aren't overly complicated. In this one, we have spores. So instead of being an ocean of water, it's an ocean of spores. And different oceans have different spores, and those different spores have different qualities to them, and we're kind of learning all of those. Our main character, Tress, is content to live on the little rock that she lives on for the rest of her life, but this boy that she really likes has left the island and something's happened to him, and so she goes on this quest to try and find him. It's very Princess Bride coded. The author has said that this is what happened after his wife and him watched The Princess Bride and were like, I wish Buttercup was doing more things. Let's try to fix that. And I think that Brandon Sanderson just really hit the nail on the head with this one. I love this. This is probably my favorite Brandon Sanderson. I've also read the Mistborn trilogy. I had some issues with the way the women were depicted in that, and I think he solved all those issues here. Just look at these end papers and tell me this is not the perfect book for spring. I have another graphic novel to share with you. It's Garlic and the Witch and Garlic and the Vampire. I believe Garlic and the Vampire came out first, and Garlic and the Witch is like a prequel. Garlic and the Witch is the spring graphic novel you've been searching for. But if you haven't read Garlic and the Vampire, I'm pretty sure you could read them in any order, but they're both pretty short, so you should just get both of them and read both of them in spring so you can get to Garlic and the Witch, which is so springy because we're following this witch who's growing a garden of magical vegetables. How stunning is that? How spring is that? It's exactly what I want. I want to be outside working in my little garden, getting dirt on myself, and then I want to cozy up on the couch with a cold glass of iced tea and reading this lovely little book. The next recommendation I have is Coraline. I love Neil Gaiman. I think a lot of his books could be a spring vibe, but I think Coraline especially just because of the rain. And I'm probably conflating the book and the movie a little bit because I know the movie has a lot more like gardening aspects to it, but you could read the book and then watch the movie and have a fantastical springtime. It really feels like the perfect spring book because this is what prompts our main character to go searching through this house that she has just moved to. Is there's a rainy day and she can't go play outside. Her mother won't let her go play outside in the rain. So she ends up exploring the house and finding a door. Through that door is this other world and her other mother and her other father. And they're seemingly a lot more attentive to her needs than her parents are in her real life. But there's some darkness happening under the surface, and she ends up having to save her parents and some other entities along the way. A really fantastical, cozy fantasy, dark time. Don't get me wrong, this is quite dark, but like all of Neil Gaiman's books, retains that undercurrent of cozy. I also have a poetry collection to recommend to you. This is Bargain Bin Romcom by one of my favorite YouTubers, Lena Norms. This is her first poetry collection. She did all of the illustrations herself. They are absolutely lovely. And I think just like, I mean, does that not scream spring to you? The color, the title, it really feels like a giggly but serious conversation with your best friend. I'm gonna read you the back of this because I think it just perfectly encapsulates what this collection is all about. From the politics of ice cream to the permission slip you didn't know you needed, this is a tongue-in-cheek look at living on a planet that is filled with both doom and glitter. If that's not spring, I don't know what is. Braiding Sweetgrass is the perfect nonfiction book for the spring, and I will take no notes on that statement. This is absolutely everything that I love in nonfiction. It's essays which teach me something about a topic that I know not a lot about. In this case, we're learning about both plants from our author, a botanist's perspective. We're also learning about Native American traditions and wisdom, and we're also getting to hear these insights into our author's personal life. And just the juxtaposition of all those things together is absolutely stunning. There are incredible essays in here about different plants. As I'm reflecting on this book, which I read over a year ago now, this lovely essay about a pond is coming to mind as being especially spring, as well as this one about strawberries that nearly made me cry. It was so stunning. What's more spring than a graphic novel about a gardener and a ghost? I don't see an answer to that question because there isn't one. Let me show you some of this beautiful green art style. This whole book is blues and greens, and they're just, the color palette is just beautiful for spring. And of course we're following this gardener. We're also following this ghostie and their little relationship. It's a really sweet, heartwarming story. Has a little bit of darkness mixed into it, but the gardening theme really makes this scream spring to me. I don't think we've done a short story collection yet, so I'm gonna recommend Out There by Kate Folk. This is one of my favorite short story collections, and these ones are all out there, but they also all, I feel like, have something to do with relationships, and that's something I think of a lot. When I think of spring, I don't really know why that's in my head that spring means romance, but spring means romance, and I can't unconnect that connection, so that's what you're getting. A lot of these feel like a Black Mirror episode, and some of the ones that have stuck with me the longest are the ones that have to do with relationships. Like this one about these kind of android artificial intelligence that is scamming women out of money by falling in love with them and then stealing their identities pretty much. And that was just such an incredible short story. I think about it probably at least once a month. There's a story in here about a house that needs to be moisturized. The house can't dry out, and it is just this descent into madness that I loved the entire time. Minor Mage by T.K. Fisher is the perfect little middle grade, but kind of written for adults novella that is all about bringing the reins back to the place where our minor mage is from. And he really does not know what he is doing. He is a young boy, and his village just kind of kicked him out and said, you need to go bring the reins back. And he does not know how to bring the reins back. He does not have the tools that he needs to complete this quest, but he goes on it anyways with his little armadillo familiar. They are so adorable together, and we are following this boy through some pretty dark things, but because the central theme of this is bringing the reins back, I think of spring, April showers bring May flowers. This is definitely the showers section of that phrase. Next up, I have The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. Kat Valente is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. I read Come For Me With Apples a long time ago and recently read Deathless and did not realize that they were written by the same author. And so once I had discovered that this author does horror and dark fantasy so well, I thought I need to pick up everything this author has ever read. Turns out she also writes cozy fantasy so incredibly well. This whole story felt like a fairy tale. It really was so spring. The green wind is what comes to take our main character to fairyland, and once she's there, she experiences all of these tricks and plays on words and fairy tale shenanigans. She has different quests she needs to complete. It feels very similar to Neil Gaiman's writing style, I would say. Kat Valente is almost like Neil Gaiman and T. Kingfisher merged into one author, and she's absolutely incredible. I loved every second of this book. We were following so many different animal companions, and not humans, but humanoid creature companions. It's a story of friendship, it's a story of loss, it's a story of finding yourself, losing yourself, appreciating your parents, understanding the value of time. A lot of this book takes place in a land called Autumn, but it really does feel truly spring to me because of how much change and growth is happening throughout this book. And my final recommendation for you is This Is How You Lose the Time War. I couldn't not put this book on the list. It's this gorgeously written science fiction shorter book. I don't think quite a novella. I think it's about 200 and some pages. Absolutely stunning prose in here. Just the language is dripping with meaning. And we're following these two agents, Red and Blue, and they are working upstrand and downstrand on this massive scale, super complicated, way over my head time war. And they're also falling in love and writing these love letters to each other in the most creative and confusing ways. I desperately want to reread this soon. I think spring is the perfect time for it because it has this growth and change in the whole time war and the different timelines that we're in. And it also is very much a romance, and we are getting to see these declarations of love in these really creative ways that often involve nature and animals and other various ephemera. It just feels very growth and change and love, and that's what spring means to me. Okay, well, that's everything that I have for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I would love to hear in the comments what your spring recommendations are for me, because I am always on the hunt for more spring things to read. I would love to know if you've read any of these, if you agree with me, if they're spring or not, or if you think they fit into a different season. I would love to hear that as well. I also want to hear in the comments, what is the spring activity you're most looking forward to? I think for me, my grandmother's 90th birthday is in May, and I'm going to go see my family who lives in Canada, who I have not seen for over 10 years, and I could not be more excited to finally be able to go back and visit everyone. So that is my spring activity, spring occasion that I am desperately looking forward to, and I want to hear yours in the comments as well. If you're new here, I would love for you to subscribe and join our cozy little community. We'll have lots more spring and book content coming up in the next couple of months, and I will see you next week.